Hi everyone, and thanks for joining our webinar. Today we will be showing you how to improve resource management and capacity planning across all of your work. My name is Sarah Howard, and I'm with a Microsoft Gold partner called Fragility. We've been implementing Microsoft PPM solutions for 15 years for large enterprises. Everything from engineering, construction, IT, new product development, we specialize in implementing these solutions for large enterprises. So people tend to get a hold of us when they can't easily explain what's going on across all of their projects, they don't know what resources are working on what work, and they have a hard time getting consistent reports and metrics to make project-based decisions. We've successfully worked with large enterprises across multiple industries and have deployed PPM and strategic portfolio management solutions for IT, new product development, R&D, and engineering organizations. We offer services and solutions in 3 core areas. Fragility's core business is deployment and consulting services. We provide professional services for successfully planning and implementing Microsoft project and portfolio management, including Microsoft Project Online, integrating PPM with line of business applications, and delivering strategic portfolio management solutions to support top-level management planning. We also have a growing business intelligence practice that leverages best-in-class solutions such as Microsoft Power BI. Fragility offers a set of pre-built software solutions and accelerators based upon 15 years of experience, including a set of hammerhead products that provide improved access to your cloud PPM data, accelerate access to visual reports and dashboards using Power BI, connect data between your PPM system and Azure DevOps, Teams, Microsoft Planner, and Active Directory to improve visibility, insight, and control over your work and projects. Finally, Fragility provides post-implementation support services, including expert care, which is designed to assist your PMO with gaining on-demand expertise on the solutions supported. We also offer training for your end users and administrators and an e-learning offering that can improve consistency and adoption for your users of your project management tools. We do have a set of upcoming webinars covering topics ranging from planning for a rollout of Microsoft Project Online, pointing out the differences between Project Online and Project for the Web, methods for preparing for a migration to Project Online, and trends around the PPM space and reporting. All webinars will start at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, so you can register for one or multiple events by our Eventbrite link provided or by searching Eventbrite Fragility in your browser. Hope you can join us for these sessions, which are designed based upon your feedback over the last 6 months. All videos from this and previous series are available on our Best Practice video channel on Vimeo, which is listed on this page. Topics range from managing your digital transformation program using PPM technologies to integrating PPM with Agile and line of business applications. So feel free to access this library at any time and share with your colleagues. With that, I'm going to hand the webinar off to Rob Hirschman, partner at Fragility, who's going to go through our content. Rob, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks everyone for joining our webinar today, the first in our fall series, 2020. Today we'll be focused on the topic of resource management. So the first thing we're going to do is talk a little bit about the business problem, what resource management entails and what some of the challenges are. We'll talk about some of the components that were within the Microsoft stack to address resource capacity planning and demand management, and drill down into a pretty low level of detail because we want to show you what some of the differences are, what's really changed over the last couple of years as it relates to managing all work, not just project work, but non-project activities as well as agile work that's going on across your enterprise. Towards the end, we'll talk a little bit about some good practices for planning and implementing a solution, and then answer any questions. If you could take any questions you have and just save them till the end, we'll open the Q&A manager, the IM window, and then you can ask them then. That would be really great. So to begin with, let's talk a little bit about what the core business problem we're facing is. And it's been pretty consistent over the last 15 or 20 years, where you've got folks on the left who are the owners of projects. They have the money and the investments. They really want to get results. They've got the resource request. They need people to perform the projects and deliver on the products they're bringing to market. And they're very project-based. I want to get a result for my investment. On the other side, we have the people that own the people, the resource or the functional managers. They're more concerned about managing people, priorities, utilization management, skills management, and hiring the right people to meet the demands of IT in the business. So you can see we have an really a conflict between the two groups. They're different sets of interest and a shared set of resources. And we did a poll of our clients over the last 24 months. 95% of them said their top priority was improving resource management. This is a pretty big pain point. The key challenges we see, you never have enough people. You have more than enough work, and especially at a time like this, we're asking fewer people to do more work. And we have very little internal data in organizations that's going to show us exactly what people are working on. We have timesheet systems, financial systems, accounting systems, project management systems. You really have to come up with a good strategy for bringing all that information together. And today we're going to show you some different examples of how that gets done in some Microsoft tools. And we look at who owns resources today. Historically, back through the late 80s, organizations were really working functionally, where you had line managers and you had individuals working for them, and finance people only worked in finance, HR only worked in HR. In the 90s and 2000s, we moved to more project-based work on the far right, which is where everybody mapped to some kind of a project and they moved around as projects shifted around the organization. And the reality where we work today, and where it's been really the last 20 years, in matrixed organizations, where we have line managers that often manage the people, but then these people are shared across the enterprise. They're shared with project managers to deliver projects. They're shared with product managers to bring products to market or do agile transformation types of efforts. And they're shared with agile teams that need business players, kind of the stakeholders, the sponsors, also kind of the business end users to play a role on their projects. So really, we've moved to a purely matrix-driven organization, especially with remote work now. It becomes a lot more challenging. We can start looking at the breakdown of work, and we looked at some different analyst reports to get these numbers. You really have three kinds of work most individuals and organizations are doing today. You've got what we call operational work, or keep the lights on work, and that is typically about anywhere from 10 to 30% of a person's time. If you're on the business side, it's probably less. If you're on the IT side, it's probably more. And if you're on the infrastructure side of IT, it's probably even more than that. But operational work does take up a big chunk of people's time. Then on the bottom, we have administrative time. This is time we're spending not at work that's taking away from our ability to deliver on any kind of work we have. And that can be anywhere from 3-5% up to 10%, depending on where you work, what you do, what your actual avocation is. And finally, we have project-based work, and that can be kind of grouped into project and product work, which we'll talk about, which can be anywhere from 40 to 60% of an individual's time. So when we talk about actually understanding what all the work or resource has, we have to look at these three different categories, and we have to be able to capture, measure, and report on that and make decisions based off that. We can't just look at project work and say, well, let's just assume people spend 50% of their time on projects. Let's just look at that. We really have to take a holistic look at the organization. If we start to then break up project work, it gets even more complicated. 5-10 years ago, this wasn't the case. Everything was pretty traditional. Now we've got traditional work, which is about projects, tasks, and activities. And now we've got agile work, which is more about products and features. And agile work is performed in a fundamentally different way than traditional project-based work is. So we have to start wrapping our heads around these three kinds of core work. And within the project work, we have two different subsets of that. Now, if we look at the challenge here around the different work types, we have that traditional waterfall types of projects. That's a lot easier to be forecasted. We have an activity like a design activity. We assign a resource or a set of resources. We can baseline that and say it was going to be 40 hours of work. Jim came back and told me he's done 20. He has 20 more to go. So we're on track, or we need more time, or we need more resources. So it's a very straightforward way to measure progress. If we move over to Agile, which is becoming more and more popular these days, or iterative work, it's a lot harder to forecast. The nature of Agile is you're not really forecasting. You don't know when you're going to be delivering the product. You're going to go through a set of iterations and cycles and sprints to develop what you can, when you can, and bring a minimum viable product to market. So the key with Agile work is really gaining some kind of consistency on communicating resource status. You don't want to change how folks in an Agile world work. You can't do that to get the value of Agile. But there's really no concept of a baseline. We don't know when that's going to be delivered. We have a series of sprints, and we think we're going to get a minimum viable product out in a certain amount of time, but I don't know exactly how many resources are going to work on that. So it's much more of a team-based approach. I'm going to put together a Scrum team or an Agile team. I'm going to assign that team to this effort. They're going to check the Scrum board every day. They're going to take down tasks they can work on and update their progress and do daily stand-ups. So that pickup process is different than assigning a task to a person in a traditional project, which makes tracking resource time more difficult. And it's much more product-centric versus project-centric. It's a different language, and it's a different framework and a different methodology. And often we find a lot of at least the development work that's going on in an Agile world is being done in a different system. It's not in a timesheet. It's not in a project management system. It's in a DevOps system like Azure DevOps or Jira or version 1. So there are inherently challenges with tracking this work, and we're going to get into some of the ways you can address this in a Microsoft-based project management solution. But first we have to back up a little bit and talk about the core concept of capacity planning. What is capacity planning? Capacity planning is really a combination of a tool and a process to help you determine the resources needed based off what your workflow is today and what the workflow is going to be in the near future to determine, do I need to increase my capacity, or do I need to stay where I am, or do I need to drive more people into my process or change the actual demands in the process itself. What this requires is two key things. You have to determine your current resources required that are actually doing work today. So what do I have in my inventory today, and what are those people working on? And then I have to be able to compare that to what my future need is. What is the pipeline for potential work coming up to do my capacity and demand planning? It's really important that the goal of this really is to determine how many resources do you need. And most organizations do this annually. They do a resource forecast at a t-shirt level. Then they go in and say, how many resources do I have that play those roles? So you can set realistic expectations in terms of what you can deliver from a product and project perspective. And that's really the goal, is to set those expectations, to put your demands or requests in, to come back and go back and forth and negotiate that so you can come up with a decision on what you're going to invest in and what resources you have and what you need. That's really the process of capacity planning. Most organizations do it again annually, but they review it monthly or quarterly to see how they're doing against that capacity. So when we look at how we can do resource management in Project Online, Microsoft PPM, there's a couple of components that are built in and that can support processes in these areas. The first of those is capacity and demand planning, the ability to go in and actually set your capacity, look at your demand, and compare the two to do some forecasting. The second core component that's really important is the ability to do that resource analysis and selection. Just because I have capacity, I still need to do the analysis and determine I've got 15 projects where I'm going to need 20 developers, but I only have 10 that are on staff today. If I analyze that data and look at the staging of the work and what people are working on today, I can realistically forecast that out and say, here's my gap. And then I can prioritize my work and determine what I can and can't do. Then I can go back and say, I need these additional resources to do it, or we can shift work out, or we can shift work around. So it's really that resource analysis and selection that's very important, and a tool like PPM or Project Online gives you those capabilities. The third part, and this is very, very important, is having a strategy around time tracking and actuals tracking. The key in that first step in the capacity planning process is understanding what people are working on today. If you don't have a good picture of that, it's impossible to forecast forward. So Project Online does include the ability to do forecasting, baselining, and actuals collection. And finally, you have to have some kind of a reporting mechanism to see how you're doing against where you should have been and do analytics and trending against that. And that's where Project and Power BI can really be used together to successfully come up with some good solutions. So when you're thinking about how you're going to go about implementing capacity planning from a process perspective, you also want to start mapping it over to the tools and determine which part of the tool am I going to use and how am I going to use it. And if we look at 10 of our clients, they all do these things in a little different ways. It's a unique flavor, and that's what makes it really hard for one company like Microsoft to build a solution that covers everything, but there are components in here that can help fill some of those gaps for you. So when we look at the components of PPM or Microsoft PPM from a resource management perspective, you'll see there are 11 of these that are built into the tool that can help support the requirements in these areas. We're going to go through these in detail in a second, but the ones with the stars are specific if you're doing a kind of agile or hybrid methodology, or you're doing iterative development or agile project management. Those are specifically around team resources, and intake and request and approach is really important, the integration of data from a DevOps or an agile suite, as well as reporting and analytics. Everything else is really methodology agnostic. Those components specifically would need to be set up in a way that actually cater to your methodology, whether it's a hybrid, agile, and waterfall together. So the first of these, and probably the most important in Project Online, is the setup of what we call the Enterprise Resource Pool. The resource pool is the central storage mechanism for accessing all the resources in your enterprise that you may be planning and tracking on your projects as well as on your products. It can be made up of different kinds of resources, which we'll go through in a second, whether it's people, roles, equipment, and capital. And this resource pool is configurable to meet the specific type of resources you want to store in your organization and any metadata related to them. The good news is, from a person or human resource perspective, it can be fed by Active Directory, so you don't have to spend your life provisioning and deprovisioning resources. And the important thing is, you're going to be setting up a PPM solution. There's one resource pool per instance of Project Online. So if you start saying, I want to roll out different instances for different groups, that makes resource planning and tracking a lot harder, because now you have the same resource in 4 different resource pools versus being centralized. That'll help make your decision in terms of some of the architecture behind the solution. In the resource pool, the first type of resource that we're typically going to track are human resources. These are people who have actual capacity and based on certain availability. They can be grouped in different ways, which we'll talk about, like skills and departments. It's going to drive your forecast, and it's also going to drive your actual to do performance monitoring on a day-to-day or monthly basis. And the key here is, again, you need to have actual performance updates coming in some sort of a way, which we'll get into in a little bit of time. So an example of a human resource is someone like Jim. The role he plays as a project manager. He's in the applications department. He specializes in certain solutions or products. He has a certain capacity, and he's dedicated to maybe project work with a little keep the lights on maintenance. Jane, on the other hand, is more of an administrator. She's on the infrastructure side. She too has specialties, but she spends more of her time splitting it between project and non-project work. And so we can lay that out. That's going to help with our forecasting to see, is Jane spending more time on one category versus another, or should she be spending time on one versus the other as well? And this is really going to help you do your analysis by setting up those human resources in a consistent way. Really important. The second kind of resource in the system is a generic resource. And generic resources, put briefly, are roles. Generic resources are used in early wave planning and throughout your projects. When you don't know who's going to do it, you just need a certain type of resource, and you want to request that resource from a functional or a resource manager. It's really used to help generate requests for different kind of profile resources, and importantly, it helps you monitor your supply and demand of resources. So you can do your headcount management, your hiring decisions. It's really the foundation for anything around any resource capacity planning that you're going to do in the system. So early on, I'm going to think about what types of resources do I need by role, and those would match up to the actual people that play those roles, and you can do that analysis. So the matching up of generics and details, as well as human resources, is a very important part of the setup of the tool. Then we have another resource that a lot of folks aren't familiar with called team resources. And team resources are essentially groupings of different types of individual resources that may be working on common tasks or activities. These are all resources in the resource pool like Jim and Jack and Joe, and they can fulfill work on an assigned set of tasks. We use a team resource when we want to assign a task, but we don't know who on the team is going to do it. We just know someone on the team is going to be doing the work. And what it does, it allows team members to kind of pick up those tasks, work on them, and report on their progress to their manager. It's really useful when we look at an agile or iterative kind of methodology where we, again, don't know who's going to do it. We're going to assign maybe on the right an agile team, a development team, a sprint team, or a scrum team. Individuals will be members of one or multiple teams, and by doing that, we can then do team capacity planning. We can assign teams to tasks and let individuals pick those up and report time against those. So team resources are something that's very, very useful as we move into kind of this bimodal method of agile and waterfall projects. Behind each resource, we do have standard information. And so each resource in your resource pool is going to be set up and kept up to date by either the resource, typically the resource manager is doing this. It's all fed from Active Directory, but there's data that's not in Active Directory today. For instance, the calendar, the resource's calendar. Who's going to manage that? Do you let the resource go and submit their calendar updates? Do you have the functional manager go in and set up availability, time frames, and exceptions like vacation, sick, and jury duty? We're also going to be able to set up something called max units, which is a % of availability of a resource that resource is available to work across all the work in the system. We're going to be able to set up their costs, which are things like hourly rates or one-time expenses, whether it's a person or a piece of equipment. We can use this to do bottoms-up costing on our projects and see how we're doing. And finally, we can enter different information and notes on these resources. So this is one thing to consider. Who's going to be keeping this information up to date? And typically, it's that functional or that resource manager. Then we have something called resource custom fields. And custom fields are set up in the system as a way to capture metadata that you're going to be actually applying to different resources that you're going to use to sort and slice and dice those resources. They could be things like, as you see on the right, what department is this resource a member of? Where do they sit in your organizational breakdown or your RBS, resource breakdown structure? Is there a certain cost center they're reflecting? What location are they working on? So if I'm looking for developers with certain skills in a certain location, I can set that up as metadata and then search for these resources very easily. Setting this information up as you're setting the system up versus waiting until later can save you a lot of time and make sure you can do really good resource capacity planning, because how you slice and dice your resources is often really the difference between success and failure. It's also important if you're going to be integrating your resource information with another system. Let's say you keep your HR system up to date in a PeopleSoft system or a Workfront system. You want to bring that data over and you want to keep it up to date in the resource pool and project online. We can do that using the API. Or we've actually developed some code that extends data from Active Directory to bring extra data over beyond the 5 fields that come over into Project Online's resource pool. So you can set it up and bring over any unique information in AD over into the resource pool. It can ensure you have consistency of your data, keep that data up to date in an automated way. And this is important if you have hundreds or thousands of resources. Keeping this kind of information up to date, especially when organizations change a lot, can be time consuming and challenging. That's a great opportunity for automation. So the beginning of the process, where we start, is with a project work intake process. You certainly don't want people going in and actually just pounding projects in and starting to manage them. Having a good process in the front end to capture new requests and separate them out by project type, whether it's a non-project activity, an administrative activity, keep the lights on, a waterfall project that's application development or infrastructure, an agile project, setting those up front, capturing certain metadata about them, and generating different templates on the back end that help with resource forecasting is a key part of the process. So you definitely want to think through how you're going to be doing work intake, because that can drive consistent data coming in when people want to request a resource. Importantly, we have these different project types where we capture different metadata about the projects, and we capture different resource information. So start thinking through, what am I doing around project intake, and does it reflect how I want to capture and forecast my resources? One way we can forecast resources is something called a resource engagement. A resource engagement is built both into the Microsoft Project Desktop client and in the web browser interface. And a resource engagement, if you think about it, can be used in two different ways. It can be used pre-project as an idea or an opportunity. I'm thinking about doing a project. I think I'm going to need 2 developers, 3 business analysts, and a project manager. I don't really care who they are at this point. I'm just driving that upfront demand. And I can also use it in flight. I'm running a project, and I realize one of my developers is leaving the organization or been moved to a different project. I may want to put in a request to the resource manager of the developers to say, hey, Jim just left the project. I'm going to need another developer. Who do you have that's available? So it can be used really in both scenarios. It'll help the manager communicate a bottleneck and identify solutions. And it's worked as really a workflow between a resource manager and a project manager, as well as a requester, to actually put the request into a queue and have a workflow behind it. You can do this for both generic resources as well as people if you want, and it's really designed to drive a discussion, to do the analysis, to gain an approval about who the right resources are. So this is a really great way to do your resource forecasting, and it's built into the Microsoft PPM solution. And you can see here you can do it from Microsoft Project, you can capture the request in a browser, and then the manager, usually a functional or a resource manager, can go in and analyze and allocate the resources appropriately through the browser. So once we have that intake process, the project intake coming in, we're going to put some kind of workflow behind it. And the workflow, or the governance, is a process for reviewing the requests, applying different phases and stages and different specific activities to those requests, and getting those approved. An example of how this would work with resource management is you may have a stage that says complete resource request and approval before something can move into formal planning. That may be a step that needs to be checked off, and how you would achieve that is to have that manager go in, request the resources through an engagement, and then based off that, they can check that off, and the project now goes into an approval state. So we can use this automated governance and workflow process to ensure people are following a consistent process and forecasting resources appropriately. This is called workflow or governance. And you can see the workflow in the tool. You can see in the image here, drives a consistent process, visibility, governance, and also reporting. We can see what projects are in what stages, what's waiting for approval, what hasn't been through resource requesting yet, so we can make sure if there's any work that's outstanding there before I go through my portfolio, I want to know why I don't have a resource forecast for 5 of the projects that are out there in the queue. So once we get into a point where we're doing resource forecasting, there's 2 methods for doing this. The first way is what we call a schedule ROM, and this uses a Microsoft Project Desktop Professional schedule with some generic resources associated with activities. So if you look at the right, we have a template, and we've got different phases like scope and design. We have activities that have a duration and work, and the project manager is estimating how long an activity is going to take, how much effort is there, but also you'll see the resources associated with those tasks or activities are included. So this is going to roll up and create a bottoms-up resource forecast. This is really great if you have project managers that have experience and they're already integrated into your estimating process. They've got a project schedule that's based off a template, and it makes it very easy for them to generate it. The other upside is it's easy to flow into an actual project and actually back up your estimates because it's down at a detailed level. The downside is that you may not be at a point where you have enough detail to do this kind of forecasting. So you really have to determine, do I want to do a schedule ROM or not? And if I do I have the detail to do this kind of an estimate? It's really great for pre-project forecasting when you're forecasting by role and you have a sense for what the project's all about. You've done this type of project before. It'll help you generate your workload and your forecasted demand. It's a really good technique to use in the tool. The second way we can do this is through the resource engagements that I mentioned before. Again, it's really designed to support that analysis and approval of different resources, whether it's people or whether it's roles. The downside is that every time I make a request, I can't go in and make a request for 5 resources if they're all different roles on the same project. I literally have to go in and make 5 different requests, one for developers, one for analysts, one for project managers, and each one I would put how many I need and how much time I need on that particular project. So it's not literally like going into a spreadsheet and dragging and dropping it out. We have done some solutions like that before if you're interested in ever, but it's really you have to go on an individual role basis and put each role in and say I need 3 or 4 or 5 of these guys. It's really good for capturing that demand at the front end part of the process when you don't have the detail in a schedule. And it's also really good for in-flight, someone leaves the project. It's a formal request and requisitioning process you can use that's built into Microsoft Project and Project Online. So think of this as a potential technology or tool you can use called the resource engagement. Again, most organizations use a combination of both, is what we've found. A combination of bottoms-up resource planning as well as top-down forecasting. And you can really combine the two if you want on projects if you do it in a consistent way and you train people on how to use it. And then one of the most important steps, and this is sometimes overlooked, is the ability to do time tracking. No one likes to do a timesheet at the end of the day. All timesheets really stink. But you have to have some kind of actuals collection from the people doing the work or from the project manager in order to see how well you're doing and how much time has been spent on different activities so you can support resource planning. It supports different time capture categories, which I'm going to get into next. There's always going to be some kind of an approval process for the work that team members are submitting, whether it goes to a resource manager and then a project manager, or directly to a project manager, or it can even go through a set of rules where it gets automatically approved in the tool. So you don't have to go in and approve everything. Just take a look at and forecast the things that are in trouble. It's really the only way to get actuals, if you think about it. And you have to have actuals coming in from somewhere. So we can actually do it through a timesheet or time tracking, or we can have the project managers and actually have them go into the schedules and update them themselves based off the feedback from the team members. That's a really great kind of wave one approach to implementing a PPM solution. If you've never done time tracking before, have the project managers own it initially and start to roll it out to team members where they start taking ownership. And from a cultural perspective and a change perspective, we've seen once you roll out time tracking, team members actually like to share that they've got more work than they have time. They like to share that they've done 50 hours of work instead of 40 hours of work. It helps actually back up their claim that they don't have enough time to do all the work they have. So if you can make that cultural switch and you can get people to update their time, you don't have to do it in a very complex way. It can be very simple. You can actually get a lot of progress going, and you can actually have data to analyze. So time tracking is important. Now what I want to do is, because we're trying to talk about all the different types of work we talked about, I want to drill into each type of work now and show you how you would potentially capture that. I mean, we talked about the different categories. We've got keep the lights on maintenance, and we ideally want this all in a single timesheet, which you can see on the left here. At the top, we have our keep the lights on maintenance activities. Below that, we have our administrative categories. This is the non-project time where we're not available to work at all. Then below that, we have project-based work, traditional project tasks at a summary level on projects, as well as agile activities. So starting with the first type of work, we have what we call KTLO, or maintenance work. The goal here is really to capture any time you're spending where it's not project-based and it's not time off. It's things like help desk tickets, operational support, server maintenance in IT. It could be supporting any kind of a business set of activities going on. The key is here, you're allocating a resource for a percentage of their time over a period of a 12-month period or a 6-month period. So it's a longer term bucket at a much higher level than you'd have in a project, and you just want that resource to go in and say how much time did you spend this week on these activities. This is really, really useful for breaking up on a quarterly and annual basis to see how much time people have spent on maintenance work versus project work, again, versus time off, and it'll allow you to do that analysis, which we'll show you. So the first category is that keep the lights on maintenance work. The second category, and it's not really work, it's called administrative time. And really the goal with administrative time is to capture the different categories of non-work activities where people are not available at all. Things like sick, jury duty, paid time off, vacation. It's really useful to capture this information to clearly understand what a resource is not available to work. And in the Project Online system, what it does is it debits their total capacity once this time has been approved. So they go from 40 hours a week, maybe down to 20 hours a week, to, if they're on vacation, 0 hours a week. And what that means for a manager, a project manager, is they can look at their project and forecast out, I've got a week where Jim is not available. It's going to take all of Jim's work and push it out to the next week. What does that do to my whole schedule? So as long as you have actuals coming in, this is going to help your managers forecast when work is going to be finished so they can set expectations with the business, or work with the resource manager and say, hey, we got a problem. This deliverable is due next Friday. Jim's out next week and he has another 20 hours of work. I need to solve that problem now. And you want to try to address this before it's a problem, obviously, before it becomes a risk or escalates to an issue. The key with administrative time, it's generally approved by some kind of a manager, not a project manager, but the resources functional manager. The third category is your traditional project work. And the goal here is to not only capture the forecast, but also how much someone's worked and how much work is remaining, which is really kind of the third part of that is really important. So you can see we have two ways we can track this. At the top, we have our Atlas tracking software project, and then we've got a time tracking task. So for the point where we're not able to track activities down at a very detailed level in a work breakdown structure, we may want to set up a time tracking task on every project, associate our resources and the forecasted work they're going to do, and then manage the project at a lower level, not associating the resources with the actual time. We can do this and separate this out, and this is a good way to do kind of first wave time tracking if you want to, understanding you're not going to have the detail on the tasks, but you will have the detail on what resources are working on what projects. The second approach, which is more common, is when you're working on a formal project like the Billingsley retrofit project. There's a task here called a new roofing on the south side, and we've been assigned a certain number of hours, 300 hours, you can see here. There's a forecast of a certain number of hours that are planned per day or per week, and the team member is going to go in and they're going to report their actuals against that, and then they're going to be able to go over and update their forecast based on what's remaining, as well as when they'll finish the task. If you can do this, this will give you the most accurate data for doing forecasting going forward. So you'll know not only how much has been done, but how much more is left to go, when am I going to finish the tasks, and then the project manager can easily roll this information up. It's a lot easier than sitting through a series of meetings throughout the week, modeling it out, and by the next week everything's changed. And this is really the value of time tracking in a project management system. It allows you to forecast out. So this is traditional project work. A lot of folks are moving more towards an agile framework and an agile development methodology, and even doing business projects in an agile way. So how do we track agile work? Well, put simply, we can capture time on an agile projects, and we're usually capturing it at a feature or a project level, almost like that time tracking task we had in the previous slide. We can do it in agile, either at a project level, or we can do it at a feature level, where how much work is going into delivering certain features, and all the user stories and activities below that, we're not really as concerned about that, because in an agile world that they're always moving around. But by assigning a team to a feature and allowing that team to go in and say, I worked 24 hours this week against this feature, I get a look into what people are working on agile projects. So it'll never be as detailed as a traditional project, but that's the nature of agile anyway. So the key here, and one of the things you want to start thinking about, is does this mean my development resources, or people working on agile projects, do they need to update their information in two systems? They'll typically have a DevOps tool where they're progressing their activities, moving them in sprints, doing started and progress done, and that's great. They should keep doing it there. We're not advocating for moving away from that. But they should be going into a PPM system so they can forecast, they can actually enter in how many actual hours they've done and potentially when their work is going to be finishing to support resource and portfolio forecasting and planning. This can also be enabled through systems integration. We actually have some add-ons and tools that glue data between Azure DevOps and Project Online if that's ever of interest. But keep in mind the two systems are designed to capture two different sets of data. A project management system captures data in this time-phased way. How much work do we do in a day, a week, a month? An Agile tool is really designed for progressing the work and collaborating on it. So it doesn't have that timesheet metaphor. So we really have to determine how we want to track it, set it up in the proper system, and make sure the information is kept up to date. But the good news is this allows us to get all of our work, whatever the methodology is, into one system. And just a couple of notes just about Agile work, because this is becoming more prevalent with most clients. Agile, in and of the nature of how the work is planned and performed, is not about tracking the detailed work. It's really about delivering products to market and getting a minimum viable product out there and getting business value from it. And there's no argument with that whatsoever. If you are using Agile in your organization, you really want to think through a strategy that allows for a couple of things. The first is allowing those Agile teams to continue working like they're doing. You're not going to disrupt what they're doing. So whenever you talk to someone who's an Agile coach or an Agile champion, and you talk to them about, well, I want you to use my project management system, they'll immediately back you off and say, we already have a system where we're tracking our work. That's not the nature of Agile. We're not trying to change that at all. The key here is the second bullet. That management really wants useful updates so they can forecast resources. You always need to know how many people you're going to need, and do I have the capacity to meet the needs of the business and the needs of the projects I have, whether it's products or projects. And I want to do that in a system that does that well. And that's really where a project management system comes into play, like a Project Online. So having a PPM system like Project Online and a DevOps system like Azure DevOps or Jira in the same environment, you shouldn't have friction between the two. As long as you sit down and rationalize what information you need in each place, it shouldn't be more work. And frankly, it should give you the level of detail that each group needs to do their detailed planning. So if you want more information on this, we can definitely point you to some resources specifically around managing Agile work in a waterfall or hybrid environment. Good news is once you have all this data in the system, we can do lots of analytics and reports. That gives us the data to do the insight on the current state. We can do a kind of look forward and trend to identify problems and bottlenecks where we don't have enough resources to deliver on the projects we have. And we have the right tools to do business analysis of the resource information. We shouldn't be calling IT asking for 10 or 15 different reports. We should ideally have those reports on the ready. So we wanted to walk you through a couple of snapshots of some sample reports we have that are good representations of the kind of resource reporting you might want to do. This is a report that has resource details, and it has details for a specific resource, in this case Aaron Painter. You can see Aaron Painter has a line here that shows month over month what his actual availability is, and it's red for the first 4 months, then it goes to green, then it goes to blue. And that can give us an easy, quick look at, do I have people, is Aaron over allocated or under allocated? So for a manager, this is really important information. I can see lots of information about his current assignments, how many projects he's working on. I can see down at the bottom the demand and the capacity. Capacity is the red line. Demand pushes us over capacity for a 2 or 3 month period, and availability, whether that's positive or negative. So I can clearly communicate I have a 4 month period where Aaron is at capacity or well above it, and he has no availability whatsoever. Ideally, I want to try to fix that problem before month 1 or 2 hits. And if he's already embedded in a project, that's going to be harder, but I want to back that up and see if can I take away some of his maintenance work. And let's see who doesn't have enough maintenance work that has a background with maintenance. I can match it up to people with skills. So this is where we can start to use the data to ask questions and make decisions. But also on the bottom left, we can see the work by project. So we can see that Aaron is spending a lot of his time on a single project, the upgrade of our ITSM system, where we've got a health assessment project. He's also working on some service tickets in our other service management application. So it gives us the visuals to make decisions and start to ask the right questions. Another really great report, again another Power BI report, shows us a couple of things. It shows work by project type. So if I go in and I can look at, for this case, Irwin, all the work he's performing, I can break down at the bottom. Here's all of Irwin's maintenance work. Here's all the work he's doing on an Agile project, the features he's working on, the waterfall projects where he's doing a spec. I can see his help desk tickets here as well. And again, more Agile work here too. You can see it aggregates all the information up. So I can see his total work and where he has % complete, and also see how the breakdown of that work is coming along. Again, just more examples of the kind of reporting you can do to make smart staffing decisions. Another report here, Power BI, that shows us by role. So we're backing up from the resource. We're just looking at the roles. And it allows us, you'll see here on the top left, top 5 assignment work by role. So I can see which of the 5 groups of resources that I manage have the most work right now. And there is a glaring blue line here for our product engineers. And then what I can do is I can go to the bottom right and see the top 15 projects that are consuming those engineers. And I can see the names of those projects below. So I can see there's 2 projects here that are consuming the bulk of my capacity of my resources. So by doing some of that generic resourcing and matching resource names to roles, I can roll all this up and do role-based resource forecasting, which is a really useful tool to say, I've got these periods where I've got more demand than I have capacity. We're going to need more engineers going into next year because we've got all these other projects and products that we're going to be developing. So it allows you to get ahead of the curve. And finally, another report here that shows us a couple of things. It shows us our assigned work versus capacity over time, month to month. And you can see where that crosses over, where our capacity line is the thin line. Our assigned work is the dark blue. We can pick this out. On the left-hand side, you'll see over a time period. Show me the next 90 days, the next 6 months. Let's do a look back as to how we did over the last 60 days, last 9 months, last 1 to 3 years. So we can do a historical look at that data as well to do trending to see how well we did. We can look at resources in different departments. So we can say, show me my people that work in IT in a matrixed organization versus my HR resources. Are they working on more or less work over different periods of time? Am I taxing HR resources at just the time I don't need to tax them? And finally, down at the bottom, I've got the different roles where I can pick out a very specific role and say, show me the folks in finance that play a financial analyst and a business analyst, and let's look at that data. So by integrating a Power BI reports in with your project online data, and once the system is set up, you can get these kind of reports and ask the right business questions and solve problems. And these are just some examples. And finally, one last one for you. This is actually a breakout. It's a Power BI report. You can see the different administrative categories. So whether we're working on maintenance work, incident requests, consulting, and break fix, we can visualize that across our portfolio and see how all of our resources are spending our time, or pick it by manager or director or executive or even department and say, wow, I didn't realize our finance folks were spending so much time on certain types of work. Maybe we need to shift that going into next year to get more value out of that. Those folks should really be working on projects of a certain type. So if you're interested in hearing more about this, again, we've got lots of content, webinars. We also do a lot of deployments of these technologies around Power BI and Project Online. So just before we get into question and answer, I did want to let you know, just from an implementation perspective, some good practices. And really, the good practice that we can recommend is you want to take a structured approach to this to really drive the results you're looking for. What is the business problem you're looking to solve as it relates to resource management? Define that, start defining the process and the tool together, and start to put the right steps in place to put the tools in place so you can implement your process successfully. The first step in that process is developing a strategy that's going to align to the goals and the processes you want to put in place. What is the overall strategy? And realizing that the tools aren't going to fix the problem. The tools in alignment with the process and alignment with the strategy can address your problem and give you the information to make that problem go away. If your problem is, I don't have visibility into my resources, so I don't know how to forecast, then having the system in place with the right configuration, people following the right process from beginning to end, can give you the data to solve that problem. Now you can answer those questions. These things are all very, very tightly tied together. And you need to really take some time and understand and align some of the things we went through today. Microsoft has a certain interpretation of how resource management works, and there's lots of nuances of how you can set this up based off your specific business process. But sticking to Microsoft's way of doing it, just from a naming conventions, can really help you standardize, because there's thousands of organizations that are doing similar things that you can learn from versus having to invent your own way to do it, building a custom application, and then being kind of stuck when you want to make changes to it. And Microsoft continuously iterates on this based off of feedback from customers as well, so you can leverage those best practices in the industry. You also want to think about implementing resource management as a part of every phase of your deployment, whether it's I just want to assign people to projects, or I just want to capture all their time in one place in order to actually do some basic resource planning, or if you have bigger problems you want to address. Think of it as that kind of crawl, walk, run that the analysts will tell you a lot about, but think resource management in each of the different phases and how can you improve on it at each step of the way, because without the people, it's very hard to implement anything in an organization. And finally, you really want to develop a plan for how you're going to track your Agile work. Hopefully you saw that in today's presentation, that Agile work can still be tracked, but there are nuances to it. You don't want to change how Agile teams work. In fact, you can't impact that because they're working in a very different way. So you want to do it in a way that makes their lives easier and gives you the data and the information to make business decisions. Really important. And finally, we always recommend you partner with someone who's done this stuff before. Resource management is a unique process, a unique discipline, a unique set of tools, and we can definitely point out the gotchas and get you down the road and make sure it's successful the first time. Because if you suddenly go in and you set it up and you push out timesheets and project managers are doing something a certain way, none of these things are connected, your users are going to get very, very frustrated. And they're going to push back. They're going to say, I'm not using it. I'm going to go back to the way I did it before. Team members will see 10 different things in their timesheet, and they'll be like, I don't think I want to do this. This is way too inconsistent. And then you're stuck right where you started, but you have doubts about whether a system can solve a problem. So if you do need assistance, feel free to reach out to us at Progility. We've gone through these deployments literally hundreds of times, and we can definitely help you out. So with that, Sarah, we've gone through the core of our presentation. I'm going to open up the Q&A manager here.
All right, everybody, I'm opening up the meeting IM, so you can go ahead and insert your questions there. From Gregory Hale, can we get a copy of the slide deck? We'll actually be putting the webinar on our Vimeo channel. Rob, can we also get the slide deck out?
Absolutely, we can send a copy. No problem.
All right, no problem. From Vani, was administrative work added as a project? We don't reserve our resources to non-project tasks, so it would be great to be able to add hours of time of resources.
Good question, Bonnie. So there's those three different categories of work. We have project work, we have kind of keep the lights on maintenance activities, and then we have what we call administrative categories, which are not projects. They're actually set up as what are called administrative categories in the system, and they will show up on every resource's timesheet, and they'll be able to book hours against that as well.
Okay, and from Leon Green, how do I engage Fragility for partnering or developing resource capacity capabilities in my organization? Leon, you can reach out to us directly at the email address provided here. From Matt, for Power BI report showing resource allocation at the project and task level, is there a version of that report that is time-phased to show by month, year, etc.?
Yep. And Matt, as long as you're pulling the time-phased information in, you can actually get down to that level of detail. So that should not be a problem at all to take any kind of a Power BI report you have or build a new one that has that level of detail. That data is stored in Project Online, so we can get it out into Power BI.
Okay, from Marvin, would it require a license for all potential users to access time card collection?
That's a great question. So there are 3 licenses and user licenses. The timesheet user license or the team member license is called Project Online Essentials, and that license is the one that users would come in and update their time and do any kind of collaboration in the tool. So every user in the system, just like everything with Microsoft, does need an end user license, and that is the license they would use.
All right, do we have any more questions? We have some people typing here, Rob. From Gregory, so we have Project Online now, but it doesn't appear that by itself will provide all of the capabilities demonstrated.
So Gregory, everything we showed today, take the Power BI reports aside because those would need to be designed and built specific to your requirements, or you could use one of the pre-built report packs that Microsoft or we have. All the functionality I went through today is core in Project Online. So everything from the resource pool, the setup of the fields, the different estimating methodologies and techniques, that's all built in functionality in the product. It's just a matter of setting it up properly and leveraging it. So that's really how the tool is designed to be used. Something we could definitely help you with if you wanted more of a deep dive into that, or if you wanted to set aside some time, maybe we could get together and kind of look at what you're doing and give you some recommendations.
Okay, so from Vani, how does team resources work for reviewing individual resources capacity on that team?
Yeah, it's a good question, Bonnie. So each resource is going to have an individual capacity of 40 hours, let's say. And if I put them on a team, I can then do different roll-ups and say this team has 10 people at 40 hours, it's 400 hours of total capacity. Once individuals on that team start doing work against that, that's going to debit from that, and that'll create their availability of being positive or negative from that 400 hours. So we can do team roll-ups and then aggregate these resources into teams and do reporting on the team. So that's really the idea, is that you can then assign that team resource to a task, and then anybody on that team can go do the work if you want. So it helps for aggregating resources for reporting and assignment purposes. It also helps for assigning them to specific activities where you don't know who's going to do the work, but the team is going to be doing the work.
Leon Green, earlier you mentioned that participants on this webinar can access the presentation. Can you repeat how we get access? Leon, if you go to our Vimeo site, posted here, you can find this presentation in our best practice video series. So you can also access it. I'll be sending a follow-up email. You'll be able to access it that way as well. Do we have any more questions, anybody? Give you a couple more seconds here. All right, Rob, I think that's it for questions today. So thanks everyone for joining. To learn more about how Progility can assist with improving and implementing resource management processes, reach out and we'll set up time to review your needs. So I'm Sarah Howard with Progility. My contact information is listed here. Thank you for attending our webinar today and have a great day, everybody.